Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you will shatter every assumption you have ever made about these primitive bipeds called humans. My name is Corvad the 9, third observer of the Galactic Intelligence Division, and I have been watching Earth for exactly 4 cycles now. 4 cycles of mind-numbing boredom, watching these creatures stumble through their pathetic little lives with all the grace of a dying star whale. Until today. Today, everything changed because of one spectacularly unremarkable human and a piece of scrap metal that should have been melted down centuries ago. The human in question goes by the name Marcus Kane. Nothing special about him, really. Average height for his species. Brown hair that looks like he cut it with a plasma torch, and the kind of face that disappears in a crowd. He works at something they call a construction site, which is basically organized destruction, followed by slightly more organized reconstruction. Humans excel at this sort of backwards logic. Marcus was trudging through what the locals call Sector 7, a wasteland that used to be downtown Detroit before the resource wars turned it into a crater-filled monument to human stupidity. The morning sun cast long shadows through the skeletal remains of skyscrapers, and the air still tasted of metal and regret. Perfect weather for what was about to unfold, though none of us knew it yet. I was floating 3 kilometers above in my cloaked observation pod, sipping recycled protein paste, and wondering why the High Command thought this backwater planet deserved monitoring. The humans were still at least 2 centuries away from developing faster-than-light travel. They could barely manage to keep their own planet from catching fire, let alone pose a threat to the Galactic Federation. How wrong I was! Marcus stopped near a pile of rubble that had once been a museum. The irony was not lost on me. Museums are where species put their past when they want to forget about it. And here was this human literally walking through the graveyard of his civilization's history. He kicked at a chunk of concrete, probably looking for salvageable metal. These creatures are obsessed with recycling, which would be admirable if they had not destroyed half their planet in the first place. The concrete crumbled away, revealing something that made my 3 hearts skip a beat. A sword. Not just any sword, mind you. This was a blade that had seen better millennia. The metal was so corroded it looked like it had been swimming in acid for fun. The handle was wrapped in what might have been leather once but now resembled organic soup. The crossguard was bent at an angle that defied both physics and good taste. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, probably wondering if it was worth the effort to pull it free. I found myself leaning forward in my observation chair, though I could not explain why. Something about that rusted piece of junk was setting off every sensor I had. Well, Marcus muttered to himself, his voice carrying clearly through my audio pickup. You are definitely not going to cut anything, but you might make a decent conversation piece. Conversation piece. The human thought he had found a conversation piece. I started laughing so hard I nearly choked on my protein paste. Marcus wrapped his fingers around the handle and pulled. The sword came free easily, too easily, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. As his skin made contact with the metal, something impossible happened. Every scanner in my observation pod went absolutely insane. Energy readings spiked across the electromagnetic spectrum. Gravitational fluctuations rippled outward from Marcus like stones thrown into a cosmic pond. Most disturbing of all, my quantum signature detector started screaming about something called a bloodline resonance match. Bloodline resonance match. Do you know what that means? Of course you do not, because your species is still using combustion engines and thinking that plastic is a long-term storage solution. A bloodline resonance match means that the genetic pattern of the person holding an object is compatible with the genetic pattern of the object's original owner. This only happens with artifacts that have been bonded to specific bloodlines through advanced bioneural engineering, the kind of engineering that your species should not possess for another 5,000 years, the kind of engineering that only one human bloodline in recorded history had ever mastered. I was staring at a direct descendant of the Kane dynasty, the same Kane dynasty that had ruled the Terran Empire 3,000 years ago, back when humans had actually been a force to be reckoned with in this galaxy. The same Kane dynasty that had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but legends, ruins, and apparently one very special sword. Marcus had no idea what he was holding. He was examining the blade with the kind of casual interest you might show a mildly amusing rock formation. He ran his thumb along the edge, testing its sharpness, and I watched in fascination as the metal began to change. The rust was falling away like dead skin. The blade was straightening itself, molecule by molecule. The handle was reshaping itself to fit Marcus's grip perfectly. What had been a piece of scrap metal 30 seconds ago was becoming something that could cut through starship armor like tissue paper. And Marcus, bless his oblivious little heart, was completely focused on trying to figure out if the sword would fit in his toolbox. That was when my proximity alarms started shrieking. I spun my observation pod around and felt my blood freeze in my veins. 3 ships were approaching Earth at impossible speed, their signatures matching no known vessel configuration in the galactic database. They were sleek, predatory things that moved through space like sharks through blood-warmed water. Sectari raiders. The Sectari are what happens when you take all the worst qualities of a dozen different species and blend them together with a healthy dose of homicidal insanity. They had been extinct for over 1,000 years, wiped out during the purification wars for crimes against existence itself. Apparently someone had forgotten to tell them about being extinct. I counted 12 ships in the first wave, with more appearing every second. Their destination was obvious. Earth, more specifically, the exact coordinates where Marcus was standing with his newly awakened sword. How had they known? How had they detected what even I had missed until moments ago? The answer came to me with the horrible clarity of a supernova. They had been waiting, watching, preparing for this exact moment for 3,000 years. The Sectari had never forgotten about the Kane dynasty. They had never stopped hunting for the lost Emperor's bloodline, and now they had found it. I opened an emergency channel to Galactic Command, my hands shaking as I input the priority codes. This was no longer a routine observation mission. This was the beginning of something that could reshape the entire galaxy. Galactic Command, this is Observer Corvan 9 reporting Code Black situation on Terra. Repeat, Code Black. The lost Emperor has awakened, and the Sectari are moving to intercept. The response was immediate and terrifying. Observer Corvan 9, you are ordered to maintain position and document all activities. Under no circumstances are you to interfere with developing situations. This is now a Priority Alpha scenario. Priority Alpha. That meant the High Command was willing to let an entire planet burn just to see what would happen next. Down on the surface, Marcus was still completely oblivious to the fact that he had just triggered what might be the largest military conflict in galactic history. He was walking back toward his vehicle, swinging the sword experimentally and probably wondering if his friends would think it was cool. The first Sectari ship broke atmosphere with a sound like reality tearing itself apart. Marcus looked up, shading his eyes against the morning sun, and watched with the kind of detached curiosity that only humans can manage in the face of certain doom. Well, he said to himself, that is either a really impressive special effect, or I am about to have a very interesting day. Interesting day. The man was about to become the focal point of an interstellar war, and he thought he might have an interesting day. I love humans. I really do. They are the only species in the galaxy that can stare apocalypse in the face and wonder if it comes with popcorn. The Sectari ship touched down about 200 meters from Marcus, crushing a small building in the process. The landing ramp dropped with a pneumatic hiss, and out stepped something that should have stayed in whatever nightmare dimension had spawned it. Gorth 7 was 9 feet of bio-enhanced killing machine wrapped in powered armor that looked like it had been designed by someone with severe psychological issues. The species had abandoned their original biology centuries ago in favor of surgical improvements that made them better at ending lives. Multiple arms, redundant organs, and sensory equipment that could track a target across star systems. He was not alone. 6 more Sectari warriors followed him down the ramp, each one a masterpiece of violent evolution. They moved with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of shared neural links and centuries of combat experience. Marcus, for his part, simply stood there holding his sword and looking mildly inconvenienced by the whole situation. "Good morning," he called out, as if he were greeting neighbors instead of apex predators from beyond the stars. "I am guessing you are not here for the construction work." Gorth 7 stopped walking. In all my years of observing interspecies contact, I had never seen a Sectari warrior look confused before. It was almost worth the impending catastrophe just to witness that moment of perfect bewilderment. "Human," Gorth 7 said. his voice carrying the kind of harmonics that could shatter glass at 50 meters. "You hold the blade of dominion. Surrender it now, and your death will be swift." Marcus looked down at the sword in his hands, then back up at the 9-foot nightmare offering to kill him quickly. He nodded thoughtfully, as if he were considering a reasonable business proposition. "You know," Marcus said, "I was just thinking this day could not get any weirder. Thank you for proving me wrong." What happened next redefined my understanding of both human psychology and advanced weapons technology. Marcus did not run. He did not beg for mercy. He did not even look particularly worried. Instead, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that predators wear when they realize their prey has just made a fatal mistake. The kind of smile that says, "You have no idea what you have gotten yourself into." And then Marcus raised the sword. The blade erupted into flames that were not quite fire, energy that was not quite lightning, and light that was not quite light. The air around him began to ripple with power that made my instruments scream in harmonics I had never heard before. Gorth 7 took a step backward, and I realized that for the first time in his enhanced life, he was experiencing something his species had forgotten how to feel. Fear. "Oh," Marcus said, his voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to bypass the laws of physics entirely. "I think I am starting to remember something." The ground beneath his feet began to crack, not from weight, but from pure energy discharge. The sword was awakening more than just its cutting edge. It was awakening genetic memories that had been dormant for 3 millennia. Marcus Kane was remembering that he was the heir to an empire that had once made the Sectari wet themselves in terror. And that was when the real fun began. The Sectari opened fire with weapons that could level city blocks. Marcus moved like he had been born to dance between death rays, the sword in his hands cutting through energy beams like they were made of morning mist. Every step he took left burning footprints in the concrete. Every swing of his blade sent arcs of power that turned solid matter into superheated plasma. I found myself leaning forward in my observation chair, completely transfixed by what was unfolding below. This was not just a fight. This was a masterclass in applied violence from a species that everyone had underestimated, including me. Marcus was not just fighting 7 enhanced killing machines. He was toying with them. The sword seemed to anticipate every attack, guiding his movements with an intelligence that transcended mere reflex. He was reading their tactical patterns, exploiting weaknesses in their coordination, and doing it all while maintaining a running commentary that would have been funny if it were not so terrifying. "You know," he said, ducking under a plasma blast that would have vaporized a tank, "when I woke up this morning, I was worried I might be late for work." He spun around a Sectari warrior's charge, bringing the sword up in an arc that opened the alien from sternum to spine. The warrior dropped like a felled tree, his enhanced biology no match for a blade that cut on a molecular level. "But this," Marcus continued, parrying a strike that would have decapitated him and responding with a thrust that punched through armor designed to stop starship weapons. "This is much better than pouring concrete." 6 warriors became 5. 5 became 4. The sword was singing now, a harmonic frequency that made my bones ache even through the protection of my observation pod. Gorth 7 was backing toward his ship, his multiple arms switching between different weapon configurations as he tried to find something that could hurt the human advancing on him with inexorable certainty. "What are you?" Gorth 7 demanded, his voice cracking with harmonics that spoke of genuine terror. Marcus paused in his advance, tilting his head as if he were listening to something only he could hear. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of authority that had once commanded fleets across a dozen star systems. "I am Marcus Kane," he said simply, "and apparently I have some family business to attend to." The sword flared brighter, and I realized that what I was witnessing was just the beginning. The weapon was still awakening, still remembering what it had been designed to do, and Marcus was changing with it, genetic patterns activating that had been dormant since the fall of the Terran Empire. This human who had been nobody special 30 minutes ago was becoming something that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. And he was doing it with a smile on his face and a joke on his lips. Gorth 7 made a tactical decision that probably saved his life. He ran. The remaining Sectari warriors followed him up the ramp of their ship, moving with the kind of speed that suggested they had finally remembered why their species had spent 3,000 years avoiding anything connected to the Kane bloodline. The ship lifted off with desperate haste, engines screaming as they pushed beyond safe operational parameters. I watched it climb toward the upper atmosphere, where the rest of the Sectari fleet was waiting. Marcus stood in the crater that had once been a city block, watching his enemies flee and looking remarkably pleased with himself. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "that was educational." The sword in his hands was still glowing, still singing its harmonic song of awakened power. But I could see that it was not finished yet. The weapon was continuing to change, continuing to unlock capabilities that had been sealed away for millennia. And more importantly, Marcus was continuing to change with it. I could see it in the way he stood, the way he moved, the way he held his head. Genetic memories were surfacing, bringing with them knowledge and instincts that no human alive should possess. He was remembering how to be an emperor. My communication system crackled to life, priority signals flooding in from across the galaxy. The Sectari attack on Earth had been observed by a dozen different species, and everyone wanted to know the same thing. Had the lost emperor truly returned? I looked down at Marcus Kane, standing alone in the ruins of his world's past, holding a sword that could cut through the fabric of reality itself, and I knew that question was about to be answered in ways that none of us were prepared for, because this was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. 23 minutes after Marcus Kane had turned 7 Sectari warriors into decorative corpses, my observation pod's proximity alarms started having what I can only describe as a complete nervous breakdown. The Sectari fleet had arrived in force. 147 ships materialized out of hyperspace with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of centuries of military drilling. These were not the scouting vessels that had tested Marcus earlier. These were full-scale warships, each one carrying enough firepower to glass a small moon. I counted battle cruisers, assault carriers, and something that my database identified as a Sectari worldbreaker. A worldbreaker, for those of you fortunate enough to never encounter one, is exactly what it sounds like. It is a ship designed for the specific purpose of cracking planets open like eggs and watching the yolk spill into space. They had brought a worldbreaker to deal with one human holding a rusty sword. Either the Sectari had completely lost their collective minds, or they knew something about Marcus Kane that even I was still figuring out. Down on the surface, Marcus was examining the bodies of his fallen enemies with the kind of professional interest that a chef might show when inspecting ingredients. He nudged one of the corpses with his boot, and I watched through my sensors as the sword in his hand pulsed with renewed energy. "Fascinating," Marcus muttered, his voice carrying new harmonics that made my translation software struggle to keep up. "Bio-enhanced physiology, redundant organ systems, neural link interfaces. You really went all out on the modifications, didn't you?" He was talking to a dead alien warrior like they were having a casual conversation about home improvement projects. The man had just survived his first interstellar combat engagement, and he was conducting an impromptu autopsy. "Humans, I swear by the 7 moons of Kathos, your species could find something interesting about watching paint dry in a vacuum." The sword was continuing its transformation, growing brighter with each passing moment. I could see new patterns emerging along the blade, symbols that my archaeological database identified as High Imperial script, the language of the Terran Empire at its peak, when humans had controlled 17 star systems and made the rest of the galaxy step carefully around their territory. Marcus was reading the symbols as they appeared, his eyes tracking the ancient text with an understanding that should have been impossible. Genetic memory is one thing, but complex linguistic patterns require years of study to master. Unless, of course, you are dealing with a sword that was designed to download 3,000 years of Imperial knowledge directly into the wielder's brain. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what was happening. "Oh," Marcus said suddenly, his expression shifting from casual interest to something much more dangerous. "Oh, that is what you were afraid of." He looked up at the sky where the Sectari fleet was arranging itself into attack formations, and smiled the kind of smile that made apex predators reconsider their life choices. "You remember the siege of Altair Prime?" Marcus said, his voice carrying across the ruined landscape with unnatural clarity. "You remember what we did to your fleets there? What my ancestors did to your entire species when you made the mistake of testing our resolve?" The sword flared brighter, and I realized that Marcus was not just talking to the dead warriors around him. He was broadcasting on frequencies that would carry his words directly to the sectary fleet above. He was issuing a challenge. "I am Marcus Kane," he continued, his voice now carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded star destroyers and orbital bombardment platforms. "Heir to the throne of Terra, bearer of the blade of dominion, and apparently your worst nightmare made manifest." The response from the sectary fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Every ship opened fire at once. The sky lit up with energy beams that could have melted continents. Plasma bolts the size of city blocks rained down like angry meteors. The very air began to burn as the atmosphere struggled to contain energies that were never meant to exist within a planetary environment. And Marcus, standing alone in the center of what should have been his own cremation, raised his sword above his head and laughed. The blade caught the incoming fire like it was collecting raindrops. Every energy beam, every plasma bolt, every lance of destructive force was absorbed into the ancient metal and converted into something else entirely. The sword was not just deflecting the attack, it was eating it. "Thank you," Marcus called out, his voice somehow audible over the roar of planetary bombardment. "I was wondering how to recharge this thing." The sword had grown to twice its original size. The blade now wreathed in energies that made my instruments weep with electronic despair. Marcus swung at once, experimentally, and the resulting shockwave leveled everything within a kilometer radius. Everything except Marcus himself, who stood untouched in the center of a perfectly circular crater. "My turn," he said. What happened next redefined my understanding of both human ingenuity and the fundamental laws of physics. Marcus pointed the sword at the sky and released every joule of energy he had just absorbed. The beam that erupted from the blade was not simply powerful. It was transcendent. It was the kind of directed energy discharge that should have required a planetary power grid to generate. The beam punched through the sectary battle formation like a spear through tissue paper. 3 warships simply ceased to exist, their atomic structure unraveling as the energy wave passed through them. 2 more were crippled beyond repair, their hulls peeling away in layers as reality decided that they were no longer welcome in this particular region of space. The remaining ships scattered, their pilots finally remembering why their ancestors had spent 3 millennia avoiding anything connected to the Kane bloodline. But Marcus was not finished. The sword was still growing, still awakening capabilities that had been sealed away since the fall of the Empire. I watched in fascination as new systems came online, each one more impossible than the last. A targeting array that could track individual thoughts across light years. A power source that drew energy directly from the quantum vacuum. And most terrifying of all, a communication system that could reach across the galaxy in real time. Marcus was about to call for backup. "Command protocols, activate," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that bypassed every encryption system in known space. "This is Emperor Kane requesting immediate fleet support at Terra coordinates. Authorization Omega 77 Alpha." The response was instantaneous and absolutely hilarious. Every human military installation on Earth received the transmission simultaneously. Fighter pilots who had been practicing routine exercises suddenly found their communication systems flooded with targeting data for ships that should not exist. Naval commanders discovered that their submarines were receiving coordinates for orbital bombardment missions. Even the International Space Station started broadcasting fighter intercept vectors to aircraft that were still 3 centuries away from being invented. Humanity had just been conscripted into an interstellar war, and they did not even know it yet. But the really entertaining part was happening in orbit. Marcus's transmission had not just reached Earth's military forces. It had propagated across the quantum communication network that connected every human settlement in the solar system. Mars Colony received the activation codes for defensive systems they had never known they possessed. The mining platforms in the asteroid belt suddenly found themselves equipped with weapons that could crack small moons. And Luna Base, humanity's oldest off-world settlement, began to transform. I redirected my sensors toward Earth's moon and felt my 3 hearts skip in perfect synchronization. The lunar surface was opening like a flower, revealing structures that had been hidden beneath kilometers of rock and ice for 3,000 years. Shipyards, weapons platforms, fleet anchorages that could accommodate vessels the size of small cities. The Terran Empire had never fallen. It had simply been waiting, Lunabase was not just humanity's first step into space. It was the sleeping heart of an empire that had once made the galaxy tremble, and Marcus Kane had just given it permission to wake up. The first ships began emerging from hidden launch bays that should not have existed. They were sleek, predatory vessels that moved through space like sharks scenting blood. Each one carried weapons technology that was centuries ahead of anything in the current galactic database. The Sectari fleet, which had been regrouping for another attack run, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that should have been extinct. Terran Fleet Command to Emperor Kane, a crisp voice said over the quantum communication channel. 12 battle groups standing by for orders. Weapons are hot, shields are up, and we are ready to remind these scaled bastards why they used to hide under their beds when humans came calling. Marcus grinned, and I realized that the construction worker who had picked up a rusty sword 47 minutes ago was gone. In his place stood something that could reshape the balance of power across 17 star systems. Terran Fleet Command, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded the respect of a dozen alien species. You are cleared to engage. Show them what happens when you wake a sleeping empire. The battle that followed was not just a military engagement. It was a masterclass in applied violence from a species that everyone had underestimated. The Terran ships moved with a coordination that spoke of shared tactical networks and centuries of combat experience. They did not simply attack the Sectari fleet. They dissected it. Every maneuver was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing risk. Every weapon's discharge was precisely targeted to exploit weaknesses in Sectari ship design. It was beautiful in the way that a perfectly executed symphony of destruction can be beautiful. The Sectari Worldbreaker, that massive monument to their species' arrogance, found itself surrounded by a dozen smaller vessels that moved like a school of deadly fish. They swarmed around the larger ship, their weapons carving precise wounds in its hull while staying just out of reach of its massive guns. Target their quantum core, Marcus ordered, his voice carrying tactical information that was being processed by computer systems across the solar system. 3 degrees off center, port side, fire on my mark. The Terran ships responded with the kind of precision that made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about human capabilities. 24 energy beams converged on a point no larger than a dinner plate, penetrating through meters of armor to reach the Worldbreaker's power source. The explosion was visible from 3-star systems away. But the real surprise was not the destruction of the Sectari flagship. The real surprise was what happened next. More ships began appearing throughout the solar system. Not just Terran vessels emerging from hidden bases, but something else entirely. Ships that bore the markings of a dozen different species, all of them flying under Terran command. The human empire had not just survived its apparent fall, it had been recruiting. Allow me to introduce our allies. Marcus said, his voice carrying across every communication channel in the solar system. The Kelrath Defense Forces, who joined us after we saved their homeworld from the Vorthan Plague. The Sonari Trade Consortium, who appreciate our approach to interstellar commerce, and the Mardanian war clans, who find humans refreshingly straightforward in their approach to conflict resolution. I counted vessels from 16 different species, all of them flying in perfect formation with the Terran fleet. The humans had not just been hiding their military capabilities. They had been building an alliance. For 3,000 years, while the rest of the galaxy thought they were extinct, the humans had been quietly making friends and influencing people. The remaining Sectari ships were retreating now, their formation broken and their morale shattered. They had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive world defended by chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. Instead, they had found an empire that had spent 3 millennia preparing for exactly this moment. Marcus lowered his sword, the blade still glowing with residual energy from the battle. Around him, the crater that marked his first stand against the Sectari raiders was already being transformed into something else. Construction mechs were emerging from underground storage bays, beginning the process of building what my sensors identified as a planetary command center. The kind of facility that could coordinate military operations across multiple star systems. This is just the beginning, Marcus said, his words carrying to every corner of the solar system and beyond. For 3,000 years we have watched and waited. We have seen how the galaxy has been managed in our absence, and we are not impressed." He turned toward my observation pod, though he should not have been able to detect my presence through advanced stealth systems. When he spoke again, I realized that his words were meant for me specifically. "Observer Corvan 9 of the Galactic Intelligence Division," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the vacuum of space with impossible clarity. "You will return to your masters and deliver a message. The Terran Empire has returned, and we are taking applications for new trading partners." He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Hostile applications will be processed differently." The sword in his hands pulsed once more, and I felt my observation pod systems register energy signatures that should not have been possible. Marcus was not just threatening the Galactic Federation. He was demonstrating that he had the power to make good on those threats. I looked out at the reformed Terran fleet, at the Alliance ships moving in perfect formation, at the planetary defenses that were rising from the surface of Earth like flowers blooming in fast forward. The galaxy was about to change. The balance of power that had existed for 3 millennia was about to be shattered by a species that everyone had written off as primitive and irrelevant. And it had all started with one human picking up a piece of rusty metal. The communication from Galactic Command came through on emergency frequencies, priority codes flashing across every display in my observation pod. "Observer Corvan 9 reports status immediately. Confirm or deny, has the lost Emperor truly returned?" I looked down at Marcus Kane, standing in the center of his growing empire, surrounded by technology that redefined the possible. And I knew that my answer would reshape the political landscape of known space. "Galactic Command," I replied, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was reporting. "The lost Emperor has returned, and he brought friends." The silence that followed was the sound of an entire galactic government realizing that their comfortable assumptions about the universe were about to be violently rearranged. Marcus was walking toward the construction mechs now, the sword across his shoulders, like he was heading home from a particularly satisfying day at work. Which I supposed he was. Behind him, the Terran fleet was spreading out across the solar system, taking up positions that spoke of long-term strategic planning. They were not just defending Earth, they were preparing to project power across the galaxy. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But as I watched Marcus Kane disappear into his newly constructed command center, I realized that the outcome was no longer in question. The humans were back, and they were going to remind the galaxy why their empire had been feared and respected across 17 star systems. This was going to be fun to watch. 72 hours after Marcus Kane had single-handedly triggered the largest military mobilization in galactic history, I found myself witnessing something that would have been impossible just 3 days ago. The Galactic Federation was having a panic attack. Not metaphorically. Literally. The entire governing body of known space was experiencing what my psychological analysis software classified as a collective nervous breakdown on a scale that defied measurement. I was monitoring 17 different emergency sessions simultaneously. The Zenthari High Council was screaming about trade route disruptions. The Vulcan War Ministry was demanding immediate military intervention. The Crystalline Collective was calculating probability matrices for total galactic economic collapse. And through it all, Marcus Kane was sitting in his newly constructed command center on Earth, drinking what appeared to be coffee and reading reports with the kind of calm satisfaction that comes from watching your enemies realize exactly how thoroughly they have underestimated you. The sword was resting across his desk like an oversized paperweight, still glowing with residual energy from the quantum network it had tapped into. In the 3 days since its awakening, the weapon had continued to evolve, unlocking capabilities that made my scanning equipment suffer what I can only describe as philosophical crises. The blade could now cut through time itself. Not metaphorically. It could literally sever temporal connections, isolating targets from the flow of causality. Marcus had discovered this particular ability while testing the weapon's upgraded systems, and the resulting demonstration had left a crater that existed in 17 different time periods simultaneously. The Galactic Federation had received footage of that test exactly 6 minutes ago, hence the panic attacks. Observer Corvan 9, my communications system crackled with an incoming priority transmission from Galactic Command. "You are ordered to establish immediate diplomatic contact with the Terran leadership. Authorization codes are being transmitted now." Diplomatic contact. After 3 days of watching Marcus Kane systematically dismantle every assumption about human capabilities, they wanted me to initiate diplomatic contact. I would have laughed if the situation were not so absolutely terrifying. The authorization codes were impressive. I had to admit, they granted me authority to negotiate on behalf of the entire Galactic Federation, up to and including formal recognition of Terran territorial claims. The kind of authority that usually took decades of bureaucratic maneuvering to acquire. The fact that they were handing it to a third observer with 72 hours of notice told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they had become. I opened a communication channel to the Terran Command Center, using protocols that had not been activated since the original Kane dynasty had controlled 17 star systems. The response was immediate and surprisingly polite. "Observer Corvad 9, Marcus," said, his voice carrying the kind of warmth that made you forget he could probably disintegrate your home planet with a casual sword swing. "I was wondering when you would call. Please, consider yourself invited to the surface for formal discussions." Invited to the surface. The man was inviting me down to negotiate with him face to face, despite the fact that my species considered close proximity to humans to be roughly equivalent to juggling live plasma grenades. I checked my atmospheric requirements, confirmed that Earth's environment would not immediately kill me, and began my descent. The worst that could happen was that I would die horribly. The best that could happen was that I would prevent a galactic war that could sterilize half the known systems. Those odds seemed almost reasonable. The landing approach to Earth was unlike anything I had experienced in my career as an observer. The planet's defensive grid locked onto my ship the moment I entered the atmosphere, but instead of threatening me with immediate vaporization, it guided me toward a landing pad with the kind of courtesy that suggested Marcus had been expecting me. The surface had been transformed. Where 3 days ago there had been ruins and wasteland, now there were gleaming towers that reached toward the sky like metallic trees. Construction mechs moved in perfect coordination, assembling structures that incorporated technology from a dozen different species. And everywhere I looked, I saw ships, not just Terran vessels, but the entire Alliance fleet that Marcus had somehow assembled over 3 millennia of supposed extinction. Kelrath cruisers hung in the atmosphere like elegant knives. Sonari trade ships formed a logistics network that could supply a dozen worlds. Mordenian warships prowled the orbital lanes with the kind of predatory grace that made my survival instincts scream warnings. Marcus was waiting for me at the landing pad, still wearing the same work clothes he had been wearing when he found the sword. The weapon was strapped across his back now, its glow dimmed but still visible even in daylight. He looked like a construction worker who had accidentally conquered a galaxy and was not quite sure what to do next. "Welcome to Earth," Marcus said, extending his hand in the traditional human greeting gesture. "I apologize for the mess. We are still in the process of renovating. The man had rebuilt planetary civilization in 72 hours, and he was calling it renovation. I took his hand, noting that his grip was exactly the right pressure to convey respect without suggesting dominance. Either Marcus Kane was a natural diplomat, or the sword was providing him with social protocols that most politicians spent decades learning to master. "Your transformation of this world is remarkable," I said, choosing my words carefully. "The Galactic Federation is impressed by the scope of your achievements." Marcus smiled, and I realized that he was enjoying this conversation immensely. "The Galactic Federation is terrified," he said with the kind of cheerful honesty that made diplomatic conversations much more interesting. "They spent 3,000 years thinking they understood the balance of power in this galaxy. Now they are discovering that they missed a few important details." He gestured toward the skyline, where massive orbital elevators were reaching toward space stations that had not existed a week ago. "Would you like the tour?" Marcus asked. "I think you will find our recent developments quite educational." The tour was in fact educational in ways that redefined my understanding of both human capabilities and the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The command center was the size of a small city, its corridors humming with activity from beings representing dozens of different species. Humans worked alongside Kelrath technicians, Sonari logistics coordinators, and Mordanian tactical specialists with the kind of casual efficiency that spoke of long-established working relationships. This was not a hastily assembled alliance. This was a carefully cultivated network that had been growing for centuries. The Kelrath joined us after we helped them evacuate their homeworld during the Vorthan plague outbreak, Marcus explained as we walked past a tactical planning center where holographic star maps showed fleet positions across 17 systems. The Sonari appreciated our approach to fair trade agreements. The Mordanians were impressed when we showed them how to improve their weapons technology. He paused at a viewing window that looked out over the construction yards, where ships were being assembled at a pace that defied industrial logic. And the others, Marcus continued, well, they have their own reasons for preferring human leadership to the current galactic administration. I followed his gaze and felt my 3 hearts skip in perfect synchronization. The ships being constructed were not just military vessels. They were city ships, massive habitats that could house entire populations, colony ships designed for long-range exploration, and most disturbing of all, what my database identified as world builders, ships designed to create new planets. How many systems do you control? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus smiled, and the sword on his back pulsed with gentle light. 47, he said, and growing. 47 star systems. In 3 days, Marcus Kane had gone from controlling nothing more than a construction site to commanding an empire that rivaled the Galactic Federation itself. And he was just getting started. The Federation is prepared to negotiate, I said, falling back on the diplomatic protocols I had been trained to use in exactly this kind of impossible situation. Territorial recognition, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. We are open to discussing any reasonable terms. Marcus nodded thoughtfully as if he were considering a business proposition rather than the restructuring of galactic civilization. That is very generous, he said. But I think you may be misunderstanding the situation. We had reached the heart of the command center, a vast chamber dominated by a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy in real time. Fleet positions, trade routes, resource distribution, political boundaries, everything was laid out in perfect detail, updated by a network that seemed to know more about galactic affairs than the Federation's own intelligence services. We are not interested in joining your existing power structure, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made interstellar governments reconsider their assumptions. We are here to replace it. The sword on his back flared brighter, and suddenly the holographic display shifted. New information flooded in, showing things that should have been classified beyond the reach of any intelligence network. Federation fleet movements, secret military installations, hidden resource stockpiles. Political corruption that reached into the highest levels of galactic government. You see, Marcus said, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed every security protocol I had ever encountered. We have been watching. For 3,000 years we have been observing how the galaxy has been managed in our absence, and we have determined that your administration has been inadequate. The display shifted again, showing economic data that painted a picture of systematic exploitation. The Federation had been strip-mining worlds, enslaving populations, and concentrating wealth in the hands of a small number of core systems while the Rim territories struggled with poverty and resource scarcity. The Kelrath homeworld was destroyed by a plague that could have been easily contained if the Federation had been willing to provide medical assistance, Marcus continued. The Sonari were driven to piracy because Federation trade policies made legitimate commerce impossible. The Mordanians were labeled as barbarians because they refused to accept exploitation disguised as civilization. He turned to face me, and I realized that I was looking at something that transcended simple human authority. The sword had not just awakened genetic memories. It had connected Marcus to a network of consciousness that spanned his entire species. We tried the Federation way, Marcus said. For 3,000 years we stepped back and let you manage galactic affairs according to your principles. The results speak for themselves. The holographic display showed the real costs of Federation rule. Environmental devastation on a scale that defied measurement. Entire species driven to extinction by resource extraction policies. Wars that had been deliberately prolonged to maintain profitable weapons sales. So now, Marcus said, we are going to try something different. That was when the real surprises began. The display shifted to show Federation space in real time. and I watched in fascination as new contacts began appearing throughout their territory. Ships that had not been there moments before were suddenly visible to sensors that should have detected them weeks away. The Terran fleet had not just been hiding in the Sol system. They had been positioned throughout Federation space for decades, waiting for exactly this moment. "Surrender is not an option," Marcus said, his voice now carrying across every communication channel in the galaxy. "The Federation government is hereby dissolved. All territorial claims are declared null and void. Any attempts to resist this transition will be met with immediate and overwhelming force." The response was as immediate as it was predictable. Federation fleets throughout the galaxy opened fire on the suddenly revealed Terran ships. It was the shortest war in galactic history. The Federation had assumed that their numerical superiority would be decisive. They had counted on their advanced weapons technology and established tactical doctrine to carry the day. They had not counted on fighting an enemy that had spent 3 millennia studying their every move. The Terran ships did not just outfight the Federation forces, they embarrassed them. Every tactical maneuver was anticipated. Every weapons discharge was countered. Every attempt at coordinated assault was turned into a demonstration of superior strategy. Within 6 hours, the Federation's military capability had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in the outer systems and sending desperate pleas for mercy. "The transition will be managed carefully," Marcus announced, his voice reaching every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Existing local governments will be allowed to continue functioning under Terran oversight. Trade routes will be restored and expanded. Resource distribution will be reorganized according to principles of equity rather than exploitation." He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Any worlds that prefer the old system are welcome to leave. We will provide transportation to uninhabited systems where they can establish their own governments according to whatever principles they choose." It was not conquest. It was replacement. Marcus was not destroying the Federation so much as he was updating it with a more efficient operating system. And the galaxy was responding with enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. Worlds that had suffered under Federation exploitation were broadcasting messages of support. Species that had been marginalized were volunteering their fleets for Terran service. Even some of the core Federation worlds were openly questioning why they had supported a system that had brought them nothing but economic stagnation and political oppression. "This will require significant administrative oversight," I said, falling back on the kind of bureaucratic concerns that usually dominated galactic politics. Marcus laughed, a sound that carried warmth and genuine amusement. "Observer Corvandan," he said, "your people are welcome to participate in the new administration. We could use experienced observers in key positions throughout the galaxy." He was offering me a job. After watching him systematically dismantle everything I had believed about galactic civilization, Marcus Kane was offering me a position in his new government. "What would my duties involve?" I asked, surprised to find that I was actually considering the offer. "Exactly what you have been doing," Marcus replied. "Observing. Reporting. Helping us understand how our policies affect the beings we serve." Serving. He was talking about governing a service, not domination. "The sword showed you how to do this," I said, gesturing toward the weapon that had started all of this. Marcus shook his head, his expression growing serious. "The sword showed me what was possible," he corrected. "But the knowledge of how to govern justly, how to build lasting alliances, how to create prosperity instead of exploitation, that came from watching the Federation make every possible mistake over the course of 3 millennia. He walked over to the holographic display where real-time updates showed the galaxy settling into its new configuration with remarkable speed. "We learned from your failures," Marcus said simply, "and now we are going to do better." 6 months later, I was filing my final report as an observer of the Terran Empire. The transition had been completed with a smoothness that defied every prediction from Federation analysts. Trade volume was up 400%. Military conflicts had decreased by 97%. Environmental restoration projects were underway on 78 worlds that had been written off as ecological disasters. And Marcus Kane, the construction worker who had picked up a rusty sword and accidentally conquered the galaxy, was still wearing the same work clothes and drinking coffee from a battered metal cup. "Any regrets?" I asked him during our final interview. Marcus looked out through the viewing window of his command center, where the lights of a restored Earth twinkled against the darkness of space. "I miss the construction work sometimes," he said. "There was something satisfying about building things that people could live in, work in, call home." He gestured toward the holographic display, where thousands of worlds were showing green status indicators for economic stability, environmental health, and social satisfaction. "But this," Marcus said, "this is construction work on a galactic scale." The sword was still glowing softly across his back, but I had learned that its light was no longer the fire of awakening power. Now it was the steady illumination of responsibility accepted and authority wielded with wisdom. Marcus Kane had become exactly what the galaxy needed. Not a conqueror, but a builder. Not an emperor, but a public servant with the power to enforce his vision of justice across 17 star systems and growing. And it had all started with a piece of rusty metal that nobody thought was worth keeping. As I prepared my final transmission to what remained of Galactic Command, I realized that I had witnessed something that would reshape the understanding of power, authority, and governance for generations to come. The humans had not just returned to the galactic stage, they had rewritten the script entirely, and somehow against all odds and expectations they had made it better. The galaxy was in very good hands, even if those hands belonged to a species that still thought mining asteroids with nuclear explosives was a perfectly reasonable approach to resource extraction. Some things, I suppose, never change, but some things do. And sometimes, that makes all the difference.